Wendy, Paul missed it. I'm gonna have you introduce Michael. Wendy is also running for City Council for Mission Viejo, but she's gonna introduce Michael. Oh, Scotty Voights is here. Scotty, thank you for showing up, brother. Scotty Voights is in the City Council for Lake Forest, good friend. Here you go, Wendy. Wendy Buckman.
Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. I am a commissioner for the City of Mission Viejo for the Community Services Commission, and it is my honor. I have some notes because Michael has some crazy credentials which I can't remember, and today I have the honor of introducing him. He is the senior editor and editorial cartoonist for Investors Business Daily editorial page. Please subscribe to this wonderful publication. He's been published in over 500 newspapers around the world, and he is a highly acclaimed international speaker. He is also the recipient of the prestigious UCI Medal from the University of California, your alma mater. Irvine, it's also for exemplifying commitment, energy, and innovation. He's a Lincoln Fellow, and he has won almost every major journalism award, most notably the Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning in 2 years, 1994 and again in 2008. Now for a little inside information, which I always do when I introduce you. He's a hometown guy, which you heard from Dave. He grew up in Mission Viejo, right down the street from my husband, Paul Bucknam. And he's right down here in South Mission Viejo. Your mom still lives there. So I love that about Michael, and that's why it's so special that you're here in this venue. This man is an amazing musician. He and Paul sang in choir together at Capo Valley High School. And he can sing. He's also a musician on the keyboards, on the guitar, whatever he needs to learn, he learns it. And he can also sing karaoke, and he can really sing karaoke. I think you've been to some karaoke where, my husband and Paul are very, very honored to call this patriot our very good friend. So I welcome Michael Ramirez. Thank you, Michael.
In fact, I'm just going to sing tonight. You know, it's great to be back home. I am there's my girlfriend Deborah back there in the corner. My friend Mary is over here. It's so good to be around the hometown crowd. You know, I learned to surf at Salt Creek, spent many volleyball tournaments right here in Lake Mission Viejo, went to Capo and San Clemente. And really, the greatest people in California are right here in Orange County. And I can't think of a better way to spend an evening than with you guys here in Tortilla Flats. You know, we're in a pivotal moment here in our history of this country. And at this juncture, we can go one of two ways. And so it's so great to see conservatives out there who know what our constitutional framework is and know how serious this diversion from liberty has been. It's time to get our country back. Let me tell you a story. There was this young man, he was on trial, and the judge was chastising him. He was saying, how could you possibly do such a terrible, terrible deed, killing a California condor? There are only 27 of them left in the wild. What could possibly be going through your mind to allow you to do such a terrible, terrible deed? And the young man turned to the judge and he said, Your Honor, I was lost in the wilderness. I fell off this cliff and landed on this ledge, and I was stuck there for 7 days and 7 nights with no food, no water. And apparently I looked pretty bad, and as I laid there, this giant buzzard landed on top of me, started pecking at me. And with the last ounce of strength in my body, I picked up a rock, I bashed him in the skull, and I ate him. It was a matter of survival. It was sustenance. And the judge said, well, you know, that's a pretty good reason. I may just let you off. Just out of curiosity, what did it taste like? And he said, well, it's kind of a cross between a bald eagle and a spotted owl. A story with a twist, an element of humor to capture your attention, and then the fatal blow. Essentially, that's editorial cartooning. When people ask me what is an editorial cartoonist, I always say we're kind of a hybrid. We're a cross between Edward R. Murrow, Ted Koppel, and the Son of Sam. Editorial cartoons are about concept. The illustrations are merely a vehicle to convey a point of view. We're here to protect and inform the public, to attack and repel those who do not share our long-term philosophical interests, to attract and compel the readers to arms in the battle against the lethargic, the complacent, the evildoers. Of course, by that I mean Congress. The champions of the status quo. You could basically say I get paid to be obnoxious. It's the only other profession besides dentistry where you get paid to be obnoxious. Now, politicians would have you believe that they get paid to be obnoxious. They don't get paid to be obnoxious, they're just obnoxious. That's why we have editorial cartoonists. It's a profession about ideas. 95% of what I do is concept, or pushing a particular point of view. We are the pit bulls of journalism. We're trained to attack at the slightest provocation. We are the prosecution, pushing for a rapid conviction and an immediate execution. We are the judge and we are the jury. We're the defense, punching holes in the arguments raised against our cause. We are judge and jury, and since I'm not from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, my sentences actually make sense. Now, in order to be judge and jury, Deborah can tell you I have the most boring job in the world. Basically, I'm a political wonk. I get paid to read and analyze the news. Now that I'm co-managing the editorial page at Investors Business Daily, we have a daily editorial meeting from 8 to 10 in the morning, which I start prepping for around 5:30 in the morning. So I read, just basically read. I'm boring. I just read all the time. Everything I can get my hand on. I read the LA Times, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Investors Business Daily, which is the best newspaper in the world. Did I mention that? You could go to investors.com. Some people say the truth lies somewhere between the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The truth lies in the pages of the Investors Business Daily. So, essentially, I read as much as I possibly can. I work for the Weekly Standard, so I read the Weekly Standard, National Review. If I want a good laugh, I'll read The Nation or Mother Jones. I think it's important to view the issues on the broadest possible reference plane. In fact, if you firmly believe in something, I always urge you to read the opposite of it, because most times it's going to merely reinforce what you already believe. But sometimes it may give you a different point of view. And it's so important with the complexities of life today to understand these issues on the broadest possible level, to get a comprehensive view of the issue. I believe it's important to understand all sides of an issue, and that entails knowing the contrary point of view. I'm a firm believer in the statement, know thine enemy. So, basically I spend my time gathering information, processing the information to draw a conclusion, to draw a cartoon, and hopefully to draw blood. Now, the media's job, the reporter's job, is to be the purveyor of fact, to point out the injustices of the world, to shine the hot spotlight of exposure, to wound the perpetrators of those injustices with the truth. As an editorial cartoonist, my job is to shoot the wounded. Now, I want to make a distinction here between objective news reporting and the subjective editorial page. It's always funny when people call me up and they don't call me Mr. Ramirez, they call me other names, which I won't use. But they say, you are way too opinionated. And I have to say, well, that's why I'm on the opinion page. But you know what? I realize why it's so hard for them to understand the distinction between the two. Because frankly, the mainstream media is not doing their job. I mean, when you think about the focus of this budget battle that's going on right now, Dave and I were talking about this earlier. Where is the outrage? We have a $14.5 trillion national debt, which is higher than the gross domestic product of the United States of America. And we're debating whether or not we're going to cut the budget? Are you kidding me? You know, I was watching the coverage of the Reagan Centennial Celebration, and I think Ronald Reagan has a lot of lessons for us. And what really bothered me about the coverage was the emphasis on the coverage of this great president. Reagan, who was perhaps the greatest president of our modern time, I think provides us a lesson in presidential leadership. But they didn't focus on the things that Reagan did. They focused on his eloquence. Well, now, surely the president was one of the most great communicators. But they glossed over his achievements. And I think, you know, as I give speeches to universities and colleges across the country, our kids don't even know who Ronald Reagan is and who he stood for. Now, if you've been to the Reagan Museum in Simi Valley, you might have seen the clip where Reagan comes out. He's hosting a bunch of editorial cartoonists at the White House. And I was fortunate enough to be in the audience during that presentation and got to meet the president. One thing I loved about Ronald Reagan was his sense of humor. The joke he told that day was the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union. Democracy versus a communist society where free speech is limited. And he said the difference between the United States and the Soviet Union is, in the United States, political cartoonists can draw editorial cartoons on the President of the United States. In the Soviet Union, political cartoonists must draw editorial cartoons on the President of the United States. You see, Reagan was essentially an editorial cartoonist, but with words. His jokes were funny, but they always had a cogent point. Take America's Cold War with the Soviet Union. On March 8th, 1983, Ronald Reagan declared the Soviet Union the evil empire. Now, the reaction in the mainstream media was immediate. There's a blanket of condemnation which rose from the political pundits and the mainstream media. Critics and conventional wisdom called Reagan's remarks unpresidential, an abrogation of diplomacy. They characterized him as this doddering old man who was barely in charge of his mental faculties, who was unaware of what he was saying. And they said much, much worse. But in the most remote part of Siberia, deep in a Soviet gulag, in a dark, damp, and dingy cell, a sympathetic guard leaned over to a Soviet dissident, a political prisoner, and quietly whispered between the bars of his cell, "Ronald Reagan has just called the Soviet Union the evil empire." The whisper hung there for a moment, and then the guard left him in the darkness. Quietly, a metallic sound of a worn spoon tapped against his prison cell, repeating the news in Morse code. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, has just called the Soviet Union the evil empire. One spoon, tapping, and then another, until you had a cacophony of defiance in the gulag. You see, words have meanings. And Reagan's words marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. Reagan wasn't just a good speaker. Reagan was a crusader against evil in the world, and he boldly challenged Mr. Gorbachev to tear down the wall, and it fell. Words have power. But words are only powerful if they're pursued with meaning, purpose, commitment, and action. The collapse of the Soviet Union was only one facet of Reagan's achievements. When I was looking at his record the other day, thinking about the modern times that we live in, the distractions and the diversion from liberty and freedom that this administration has taken this country. And when you look back at Ronald Reagan and the America that he inherited before his inauguration in 1981, America was suffering as we were told by Jimmy Carter's departing administration, from a national malaise. And it was our own fault. Does that sound familiar? The misery index, which was unemployment plus inflation, was above 20%. We had high unemployment. We had double-digit inflation. Inflation was 13.5%. Double-digit interest rates. The prime rate was above 21%. Do you remember that? The soft diplomacy of Jimmy Carter's policy of appeasement had severely damaged America's reputation abroad. There were deep cuts in the military. We had hostages that were taken for 444 days. 66 American hostages, 52 of them left in Iran for 444 days. In the winter of 1979, America had lost faith in itself. And Jimmy Carter told us, stop whining and be more conservative with your energy. Well, in 1980, America took his advice, and they became more conservative. And they elected Ronald Reagan. "20 minutes after he was sworn in, Iran released the American hostages because words have meaning when they're followed by commitment. You see, Reagan took us from the darkness. He restored funding and established a strong national defense. He advocated a diplomatic policy of peace through strength. He plans to reduce government programs. He pushed a 25% across-the-board tax cut and income tax, the largest in history. And he stopped apologizing for U.S. wealth and might and projected America's greatness. The Economic Recovery Act that was signed into law in 1981, it was the engine for growth for over 2 decades. Now, this was a free market-based economic solution, a prescription that created greater incentives for work, investment, and individual achievement that unshackled the American dream. And for those progressives, we keep on repeating that these tax cuts are for the rich, who believe that any kinds of cuts are a windfall for the rich. Well, the top 10% were paying 48% of the total income taxes in 1981. By 1988, the top 10% were paying 57.2% of the total income taxes. But most of all, rather than apologize for America, he made America believe in itself again. This is a uniquely American idea, one that believed in the power of the people rather than the power of government to find the answers to our problems. Reagan believed if government would get out of the way, Americans could provide the solutions. Now, today the media is trying to make a comparison between Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama. The media has decided because Obama, like Reagan, is a good communicator, that he has great oratorical skill, that somehow they're presidential equivalents. Now, the purpose of this exercise is to elevate Obama out of his dismal record. Now, even if you believe Obama was as good of a speaker as Reagan, which he isn't, this is where the similarities end. This silly notion can be quickly dismissed simply by looking at Obama's record. Look, we have real economic malaise. We have a significant increase in the burden of government regulation. We have a huge expansion of the federal government and its intrusions into American life, an imposition and takeover of the U.S. healthcare system, a dramatic increase in government subsidies and programs, tax increases, and trillions of dollars in debt planned for the next decade. We've got high unemployment. We have a soft diplomacy that squandered American influence in the world and confused our allies while bolstering our enemies. We've abandoned a strong Middle East ally with a strong likelihood that it's going to be replaced by an anti-American Islamist extremist state. We have a strategic arms limitation treaty, which is deferential to the Russians and counts our conventional weapons as strategic weapons. Oil prices are at record highs. Does this all sound familiar? It should. Because they shouldn't be comparing Barack Obama to Ronald Reagan. They should be comparing him to Jimmy Carter, and he is worse. You know, Carter's answer to the energy crisis was to regulate the oil industry and impose a windfall profit tax. He installed solar power panels on the roof of the White House and a wood-burning stove in the living quarters, and he thought that was the solution. He told Americans to wear a sweater. Well, worse than the Carter administration, our current oil crisis is self-imposed. Back then, at least, they had the crisis, which was exacerbated by price controls and the Iranian Revolution. This time around, we have an energy policy that bans energy exploration or buries energy development under mountains of federal regulations. The ban on offshore drilling has cost Louisiana and America billions of dollars, $330 million a month in revenue, and tens of thousands of jobs. It's a policy that deprives America of its own abundant natural resources and makes us more reliant on foreign oil. And this mythical green energy, I'm sorry, has this administration not heard of Spain? With the Obama administration, oil is the energy of the past, rhetoric is the energy of the present, and I guess cow manure is the energy of the future. And when it comes to defense, Obama's policies don't make any sense. Look, at a time when Pakistan and North Korea and Iran have or are developing nuclear weapons and a 3-stage rocket delivery system, why are we cutting back on missile defense? At a time when there's a resurrection of the evil empire, with Putin sizing up the presidency again to take over a massive expansion of Russia through force, and using oil pipelines and energy as economic blackmail, why are we cutting back on the size of our military forces? At a time when China is investing huge amounts of resources into modernizing their weaponry with anti-carrier missiles and developing a blue water navy and space wars, why are we cutting back on the advanced fighters that constitute our front line of defense? It makes no sense. This administration has lost its way. You know, in the, I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl and that interview with Obama before the Super Bowl. Obama made a promise to defend American families earning less than $250,000 a year from any form of tax increase. In that interview, he said, "I didn't raise taxes once. I lowered taxes over the last 2 years." Well, that's sort of a half-truth. He didn't raise taxes once. Last time I counted, it was multiple times. For every dollar in permanent tax cuts, he raised $7 in permanent tax increases. One of the first things Obama did after he entered office was he put a 156% increase in tobacco taxes. According to the Heritage Foundation, Obamacare has 18 separate tax increases, has 13 different bureaucratic management councils to run this thing. 7 of those tax hikes in the Obamacare violate the president's pledge not to raise taxes on the middle class. And according to the Americans for Tax Reform, Obama signed into law a net tax hike of $618.7 billion. Now, furthermore, this administration tried to let the Bush tax expire. And as we get down to this budget debate, you can bet they're going to try to do it again. Now, Obama has blamed everybody for the current economic situation but himself. He said that, this is the worst economy since the Great Depression. Well, let's get rid of that mythology. In the Great Depression, unemployment was 25.7%. Today, unemployment is 9.2%. During the Great Depression, our GDP was a negative 13.65%. Our GDP today is a little over 2%. The foreclosure rate during the Great Depression, now they didn't have official records back then, but it was somewhere between 40 and 70%. The worst figure that I've heard right now for us is a little over 15%. There is no comparison between the Great Depression and today's economy, what he was handed. The only comparison is the policy in dealing with the economic downturn, where Obama has taken an economic recession and made it into the Great Recession. Look, let's not forget that the recession ended 5 months after Obama took office, before this giant nonsense of a stimulus program was even passed. Now, if you want to make a comparison between the Great Depression and the Obama administration, a more apt comparison is between Obama and FDR. FDR, who took an economic downturn and created the Great Depression. We have massive stimulus programs and government intervention. We've got targeting investment class and business with high taxes, which is like the 1932 Revenue Act. Impeding free trade with South Korea, Colombia, and several other countries. It's like Smoot-Hawley in 1929. Currency reform, that's what we called it back then. We call it quantitative easing now. A huge federal expansion and a huge federal debt. All of this has created uncertainty. Look, Mr. Obama, I'm sorry. What's that old Einstein quote? You do the same thing over and over again, you expect a different result. It's called insanity. That's what you've been doing to this country for the last 2.5 years. Look, we tried this experiment of socialism and Marxism. It was called the Soviet Union, and it failed. It's time to go down a different road. It's time to take this country back. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about immigration since my last name is Ramirez. You know, the administration decided to go against the will of the people and Congress and impose the DREAM Act through prosecutorial discretion and a federal mandate. Let me say up front, I'm all for immigration. You know, my mother immigrated from Japan. My grandfather came from Agua Caliente, Mexico. I'm half Japanese, 1/4 Spanish, 1/4 Mexican, and completely confused. The majority of Americans are for immigration because America's a nation of immigrants. It's what makes America unique. We take the best of all cultures and we meld them into a single union. That's the melting pot. It's what makes America great. But there's a distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. Like, my grandfather was a legal immigrant from Mexico. My mother is a legal immigrant from Japan. Let me put this as simply as I can so that even Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and the New York Times editorial page can understand it. Illegal immigration is illegal. If you don't like it, change the law. Now, unlike the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, and our Attorney General, Eric Holder, I've actually read all 16 pages of the Arizona law and the House Amendment supplement. The Arizona law merely reinforces our national immigration policy. It's much less stringent than our own federal policy. Federal law requires that all immigrants carry documentation all the time because you can be asked to provide those papers at any moment. Arizona law only allows the police to ask for documentation in the process of another violation, and it clearly prohibits racial profiling. The Mexican law is worse. Their southern border is shut down. Mexico's immigration law 67, Article 67, allows anyone to ask for documentation, anyone, at any time, does not limit racial profiling, and if you do not produce it immediately, you can be deported immediately. This isn't an issue of racism, it's an issue of national security. Why we can't have a more efficient guest worker program like every other country, Canada has one, is beyond me. See, the problem that we have here is we've got an alliance between this socialist Marxist experiment and the mainstream media. These are things you should have heard from the mainstream media, but it doesn't fit into their agenda. You know, it's time to get to the truth. Newspapers and the media have an obligation to give the readers the truth. Not a filtered version of the truth, not a politically correct version of the truth, but simply the truth. Now, we're all human beings, and most of the journalists are as well. But therefore, undoubtedly, they're going to have their own interpretation of events. But that's what makes it so important to cover an issue in its entirety. And it makes it important for your job as conservatives to go out there and educate people, to tell them what the facts are. This is our country. It is run by the people. And it's up to you, the people, to make sure its citizens are informed, because frankly, the mainstream media is not doing their job. And they have their own interpretation. It kind of reminds me of this story about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. They went out for a camping trip, and as they laid down to sleep, Holmes turned to Watson and he said, "Watson, look up into the sky and tell me what you see." And Watson thought about it for a moment, and he said, "Well, I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes said, "Well, what does that tell you?" And Watson replied, "Well, astronomically, it tells me that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Theologically, it tells me, well, there must be a God to create something as magnificent as this evening sky. And God is great, and we are small and insignificant. Meteorologically, it tells me, well, it's a beautiful evening sky tonight. It's probably going to be a beautiful day tomorrow." And Watson turned to Holmes and he said, "What does it tell you?" And Holmes looked up and he said, "Somebody stole our tent." Now, we have a participatory democratic republic, the best system of governance in the world. Truly a government of the people and by the people and for the people, but only if the people participate. Now, since Mary's here, I got to resurrect my favorite story. Let me tell you this story of a duck. There was this duck, and he waddled into a store. And he walked up to the manager and he said, "Got any grapes?" And the manager looked at the duck and he said, "No, we have no grapes." The duck said, "Oh," walked out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling into the store, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager looks at him and he says, "No, I have no grapes." The duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager goes, "No, look, I have no grapes. I will never have grapes." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in, goes up to the manager and says, "Got any grapes?" The manager goes, "Look, what's wrong with you, duck? I don't like grapes. I will never have grapes. I don't like ducks. Get out of my store." Duck goes, "Oh," walks out. 10 minutes later, this duck comes waddling in. The manager goes, "Hold it right there, duck. If you ask me for grapes one more time, I'm going to nail your little web feet to the floor. Ask me for anything else. Don't ask me for grapes." The duck looks at him and says, "Got any nails?" He says, "No." "Got any grapes?" That was for you. You see, this joke provides a good working analogy of how I view Washington bureaucracies at work, especially this administration with its doublespeak. You see, because in Washington, D.C., things are not always represented as they truly are. For example, a 6.5% increase in Medicare payments is not called a rational effort to save Medicare, it's called a draconian cut. A balanced budget amendment stipulates that Congress can only spend the amount of revenue they take in. It's not called common sense, it's called extremism. Making illegal immigration illegal is not called following the law, it's called insensitivity. Judging someone not by the content of their character, but strictly by the color of their skin is not called racism, it's called affirmative action. Aborting a human fetus in its third trimester is not called killing, it's called a choice. When governments have a surplus, it doesn't mean that we've paid too much in taxes, it means that we spent too little in services. And a tax is no longer a tax, it's called an investment in America. I think Vice President Biden called it an act of patriotism. This battle that our brave soldiers have been waging against terrorists and Islamic extremists is no longer called the War on Terror. Now it's called an Overseas Contingency Operation. Our Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism, John Brennan, testified the other day. He called jihad a legitimate tenet of Islam, further arguing that the term jihadist should not be used to describe Americans' enemies. I want to know what he's been smoking. The new national security strategy document even drops the term Islamic extremism from its lexicon. And our Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, testified that the Muslim Brotherhood is a largely secular group. The Muslim Brotherhood. It has the word Muslim in its name. It makes no sense. And blowing up buildings is no longer called terrorism. It's called a man-caused disaster. Frankly, I think this administration has been a man-caused disaster. I don't know about you, but I believe in the old adage, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, then it's a duck. As an editorial cartoonist, it's my job to nail that duck to the floor. Because politicians forget who they work for. And because of the pomp and circumstance that surrounds these career political celebrities, I was looking up the statistics on the Obama administration. Only 9% of his cabinet has ever held a real job in the real economy. They lull us into thinking it is we who work for them, when the truth is, it is they who work for you. Don't ever forget it. They are public servants. They're here to do your bidding. And when we want real change, let's do it in 2012. I was looking up this statistic the other day. According to the latest census, there are 14.2 million people that manufacture goods in this country. There are 19.2 million governmental workers in this country. We have more people that produce nothing but red tape than people that manufacture goods. And according to the Labor Department, the projection is that government workers are going to increase by 8% and manufacturing employees will decrease by 9% in the next decade. I don't know about you, but I think that's a problem. The latest sector of employment gains continues to be the government sector. According to Boehner, over the last 2 years, since Obama has taken office, the federal government has added 200,000 new federal jobs. Now, the media was quick to correct it. That wasn't the correct number. It was inflated. The real number was 153,000 federal non-postal jobs. I don't know about you, but I don't feel much better. And I was looking at the statistics about government expenditures. Now, as we have this budget debate, I asked my senior writers to look this up for me. When you look at the last 4 years, now keep in mind that this budget that they're debating right now should have been done in last September. There are over 400 days past due on this budget. This is the Pelosi Congress's budget. It was their responsibility. The last time Republicans controlled Congress, our federal expenditures were $2.5 trillion. And we had a $244 billion deficit. Now, according to this latest budget proposal, there are $3.8 trillion in expenditures with a $1.67 trillion deficit. That's a $1.3 trillion increase in spending, a whopping 52% increase in federal expenditures over the last 4.5 years. And when you talk about deficits, a $1.5 trillion increase works out to be a 637% increase in deficit spending. The Pelosi Congress has added $4.6 trillion in deficit spending in just the last 4 years. Now, our population increase during that time was 3%. Do you feel like your government services have gotten that much better? You know, our country was built around the idea of self-governance and independence. 39% of Americans are on some kind of government program. 1 in 6 Americans are on direct government assistance. 47% of Americans do not pay federal taxes. In the last election, less than 50% turnout of all registered voters. If you took the real numbers of the eligible electorate, the amount of Americans that voted were less than a quarter, 23.3%. Is this the America you want? It certainly isn't the America that Ronald Reagan envisioned. You know, it's amazing when you look back into history at a small group of colonies united to fight taxation without representation. What a bunch of extremists. It's clearly evident now that we face the same challenge. This is a nation founded on the principles of limited government, individual liberty, self-responsibility, and a strong national defense. It is time to take our country back. Now, past presidential terms hold the key to future presidential successes. George Washington once said, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is a force. Like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master." Calvin Coolidge, John F. Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan found the solution to our economic problems rested not in the government, but in the ingenuity of the people. They believed in the doctrine of American exceptionalism. In their eyes, America was a place for the extraordinary to be extraordinary and to be rewarded for their success, not punished. And in turn, their success would create innovations and jobs that benefit the average American and give those average Americans incentives to work hard and dream, to become extraordinary themselves, so that others could simply remain as community organizers. You know, President Kennedy believed in an America that could reach for the stars, not reach for the taxpayers' wallets. President Obama said it's time for America to rise to its challenge when the Russians beat us into space with Sputnik. And I'm going to do that by canceling our manned space program. You know, it takes more than words and a good speech to make a great president. It takes great ideas. Reagan was an exceptional president because he truly believed America was an exceptional country. Ronald Reagan saw America as a shining city on a hill, not just a city among many, many cities. As we celebrate the centennial of Ronald Reagan's birthday, I think it's wise to look back at the past to determine our future and make sure that as citizen politic, as citizens, each of us have a responsibility to go out there, inform our neighbors, and make sure that we get real change in 2012. I'm going to try to do that by, try to encourage you by showing you some cartoons. This is why this election in 2012 is so important. It's time for us to get back to our constitutional structure and to be the America that everybody tries to move to. America that represents democracy and liberty and freedom for all. This is my book. I'm a capitalist pig, so buy it. You can get it at Amazon or you can get it here next. I wanted to give you a sneak preview of tomorrow's cartoon. This is Obama at the restaurant. He's saying, "I'm sorry, sir, but your credit card has been declined." And Obama's saying, "In that case, can I see a dessert menu?" You know, one thing you'll notice about my cartoons, too, is I like to throw in little details like the ashtray and the cigarette. But if you notice, all the plates, he didn't eat any of his peas. It's kind of funny when you have a guy who's basically been eating dessert for the last 2.5 years to tell us to start eating our peas. Here's a picture of President Clinton looking into binoculars between the demilitarized zone in North and South Korea. And if you read the copy, it says President Clinton looks into binoculars but still have the lens caps on. Here's a closer picture. You see, I'm an equal opportunity offender, though. Here's George W. It's a mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Aristotle. Next. This is from my first Pulitzer collection. It depends on what the meaning of the word is by Bill Clinton. This is on U.S.-Japan trade. Aren't they supposed to face you when they bow? Next. This is on the reorganization of the Catholic Church to become more modern. In light of the modernization of society, we'd like to renegotiate the 10 Commandments down to 4.5. Moral values, if it was not for reporters, I would tell you the truth, Chester A. Arthur. Our moral fabric. Look, with editorial cartoons, when you think about it, editorial cartooning is sort of like advertising. The difference is, with advertising, you're using images, concise images, to sell a product. With editorial cartoons, you're using concise images to sell an idea. And the quicker you can make it, I love this design of this cartoon, because it's immediate, and you understand it. It's very clear. That's the power of the image. Father, you can't say prayers during graduation ceremonies, but if you print them on condoms, we'd be happy to distribute them. What I wanted to do on Father's Day, meet my father. I'll try to get out of your way. This is when Memphis, Tennessee had a 47% illegitimacy rate. Next. Here's a black man with a black kid, a white man with a white kid. The black man's thinking white, the white man's thinking black, and the kids are going, look, another kid. You two here to be married will step up and be counted. Why society would try to impose its moral values on us is beyond me. It's perfectly natural for two people in love to want to get married. Your father should be proud of you. He is my father. This is New York Governor Eliot Spitzer's news conference. The same thing could be applied toward Congressman Weiner. Hollywood, you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Abraham Lincoln. On the left, in ancient times, people worshiped the stars out of ignorance. On the right, the Oscars. Who would callously glamorize drugs and tobacco just for profit? Hollywood. Son, your father and I decided not to let you watch television anymore because it promotes violence. Touch my remote and I'll kill you. You know, it's funny, when I first started out at the LA Times, I got invited to all the big Hollywood shindigs, the Oscar awards and all the parties and stuff. After only cartooning for 4 months, all those invitations dried up. Remember when Michael Jackson was holding the kid over the banister? This is what the kid was thinking. Michael Jackson's my father, oh please let go. There's his sister Janet. Next. Today on Martha Stewart Living, I'll be demonstrating how to cook your own goose. The O.J. Simpson trial, which is sort of like this Casey Anthony trial, and whether television aided to the pursuit of justice. Here's Lady Justice beaten to death with the television. Katie Couric, I'm not just a reader of the news, pause next paragraph. A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take from you everything you have. Gerald R. Ford. Marlboro Country. Because of the soaring cost of medical malpractice insurance, we don't have any doctors left. However, rest assured, we have the best lawyers operating on you today. The don't ask, don't tell policy. He's got his arm around a sheep. The sentry's thinking, don't ask, don't ask, don't ask. I can't believe the LA Times let me run that cartoon. Let's skip this one. On cheap Saturday night specials, our Goobinator, or I like to call him Goober for short, on whether or not cell phones distract you, can I call you back? Now this cartoon I did after the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the Pledge of Allegiance. So I have this little kid here, Bryson Bobo the Clown was all booked up, so we got the next best thing. Are you really from the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? Viva Bilingual Education! And here to share his personal success story through bilingual education is Miguel. K. At Plymouth Rock, we need better immigration laws. Well, profiling is politically incorrect. Besides, they pose no real threat to us. Earth, well, you have a slight temperature. We're not sure why, so we're going to have to amputate your legs. Social Security and Medicare. Medicare is a $36 trillion or $37 trillion unfunded liability today. Social Security started losing money starting at the beginning of this year. Freeze. Homicide, burglary, worse, trans fat. Raise your hands and step away from the chicken. On whether or not steroids make you a bigger athlete, here's Barry Bonds trying to fill Babe Ruth's shoes. This is the U.S. border fence with the service entrance. The business of America is business, Calvin Coolidge. Saving Social Security. I just like their happy faces, they look so happy. Prescriptions, well, don't just sit there, pay the man. Day trading. Government is not reason, it's not eloquence, it's a force like fire, it's a dangerous servant and a fearful master, George Washington. Now these were my favorite years, the Clinton years. Here's the Lincoln bedroom during the Clinton years. I put the meter there so they could charge by the minute. Here's the seal. I'm sorry for those of you who ate. I did not have factual relations with the American people. You know, I won my first Pulitzer on the back of Bill Clinton. And I have to tell you, the president was kind enough. The president and her husband sent me a letter of congratulations when I won. And I thought this was kind of funny, so I gathered all my Clinton cartoons, and I wrote them a note, and I said, thank you, I couldn't have done it without you. Now, I thought that was funny until I got audited 4 months later. Here's Buddy at the vet, and he's thinking, like, I'm the one who needs to be neutered? The only president who's been held in contempt of court. This is the Clinton autobiography with the pullout, Miss July, I think it is. The U.S. Senate Republicans at the trough, spending bill. Now, Nancy Pelosi, when she was House Speaker, wanted her own form of transportation. I thought she already had one. Air Force 3. Jimmy Carter. Yeah, that's anatomically correct, by the way. Nothing brings out the lower traits of human nature like office seeking. Rutherford B. Hayes. The partying of the GOP, John McCain. This is when Al Gore was running for president. He's the guy way in the back behind Bill Clinton. Thank you for your answer, Senator Kerry. Now, Wendy Buckner posed for all those poses, so. Kerry Sutra, the many positions of John Kerry. Spending, is there anything in the wardrobe to make it look thinner? Next. The answer to our election problems, Ronald Reagan 100 times. Dennis Kucinich, of course I've seen a UFO. How do you think I got here? My friend Fred Thompson, I announced my candidacy for President of the United States. I quit. Here's Obama as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She's thrown 90 buckets of water on the Wicked Witch of the East, Hillary Clinton, and she won't go away. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around, and that makes us special among the nations of the earth. Ronald Reagan. Remember Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban boy who was shipped back to Cuba? Yes, Elian, someday all these will be yours. Now, I went down to the streets of Havana with a PBS film crew and basically tried to get arrested. And the difference between America, and truly I think there are some Americans who take our liberties for granted. The difference is, I'd be talking to somebody on the streets of Havana, and a blue-shirted security guy would walk up, and the people would just walk away in mid-sentence. And I talked to the Interior Minister, who was on television while this was all going on, and I asked him a bunch of questions about the Brothers in Arms flight that was shot down in international airspace, about this incident where the Cuban Navy caught people trying to make it to Florida on a tugboat, 73 of them, 27 children. They took the tugboat, they towed it out to sea, they capsized it, and they hosed the people down. I asked him about the people that were arrested, 12 of them, for simply handing out flyers asking for a Democratic vote. And the 5 journalists that were arrested the week before we got there so they wouldn't talk to us. The way Grandma, which is their newspaper, works is you have to write for an editor and a political panel. The editorial cartoonist can't even draw Che Guevara or Fidel Castro. So I asked him a bunch of questions, and he wouldn't answer any of them, really. So exasperated, I finally said, look, let me just ask you one last question. I talked to your political cartoonists, they can't draw pictures of Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. In America, we believe that a country that cannot make fun of its leaders is usually a country that's imprisoned by its leaders. So let me ask you this one question. And they zoomed the camera in on his face. And I said, what's your favorite Fidel Castro joke? And his face just went white. And beads of sweat started gathering on his forehead. And he sat there in silence for a minute and a half, which is an eternity on television. And he finally said, I don't know one, but I'll tell you one later. This is the difference between America and Cuba. Is Russia reverting back to Soviet-style oppression? You're darn Putin. The difference between Chinese intelligence and American intelligence. Chinese intelligence, we've located the U.S. miniaturization blueprints for the W-88 nuclear warhead and all its design specs. U.S. intelligence, we found the Chinese embassy on a map. Kim Jong-un, North Korea. You know, I'm amazed at how all these leaders of these despotic regimes, they look like they're out of central casting from a James Bond film. Or I should say an Austin Powers film. They're like 3'2". Let's skip through these. Let's skip through these. We're going to skip through these. The Middle East, as civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all peoples of all countries together in the same world at peace. FDR. The Intifada. An eye for an eye for an eye for an eye. It's people that have t-shirts that say, I love suicide bombers, bomb Israel, kill Jews. They bulldozed our home. Why? Remember, good fences make good neighbors, but this is our living room. How dare you defend yourself? You know, I find it unbelievable how the United Nations can continue to condemn Israel when they're sending hundreds of rockets over the border. Imagine if Mexico was sending hundreds of rockets across the border into San Diego. The United Nations would tell us we cannot defend ourselves. September 11th, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, Thomas Jefferson. This is the cartoon I did on 9/11. Sometimes with editorial cartoons, you're just trying to capture the emotion of the moment. I'm proud to say that the New York Fire Department made t-shirts out of this and sold them to raise money. The lack of cooperation and coordination between our intelligence services, I got it. Frankly, I can't think of a bigger threat to America than this assault on our civil liberties. This moment must never be forgotten. Hey dudes, what's up? Can you believe it took 2 hours to get through airport security, stinking Patriot Act, and what's this, $87 billion for Iraq? What you doing? How soon we forget. And you know what? The problem with Iran right now isn't just that this regime that exports terrorism and uses proxies to attack other countries and is projecting and exporting instability throughout the region, is going to acquire nuclear weapons. That's only part of the problem. The larger problem is that there will be a nuclear arms race in a region with lots of money and lots of instability. Now, picture this. We lost 3,000 American lives. The nuclear weapon, and they're developing a third stage rocket now, you're going to lose 1 million people's lives. Maybe not with a rocket, maybe with a bomb. But what do you do when they use a proxy to execute an act of terrorism like that? Do you take out an Iranian city? It is a much, much more difficult process to deal with this regime after something like that has happened than dealing with it now. We need to get rid of those nuclear weapons. Please remove your shoes and hat. You'll have to remove the Patriot Act. Please remove the NSA wiretapping program. You're going to have to remove the prisoners from Gitmo and immediately remove the troops from Iraq. I'm feeling a little exposed. Move along. Or, I never saw a pessimistic general win a battle, Dwight D. Eisenhower. That's describing our policy in Afghanistan. Here's my favorite pre-war cartoon on Saddam. Saddam at the psychic looking in the crystal ball saying, run. It's totally unrealistic to turn over power to the Iraqis in 30 days. France had proposed this. France, why? We turned over our government to the Nazis in under 30 days. The case against Saddam. You know, he was such a horrible, horrible human being. When I was in Iraq, I just heard these horrible stories about him. You know, we missed ending the war by, I think they're saying 8 to 11 minutes. I went to the Ba'athist headquarters where the first cruise missile struck. They took out 167 of the Ba'athist leaders. They were all sitting in the movie room watching Pretty Woman. And Saddam was 11 minutes late. 50,000 reasons why the world's better off without Saddam Hussein. Let's scroll through these to the end. So I don't want to keep you guys for too long, and if you want to see them, you can buy them. Here we go. Obama, I have no idea what it is, but I feel strangely attracted to it. This is the 2008 Pulitzer collection. As a matter of fact, we just bought another SUV. Bush on Putin, I looked the man in the eye, I was able to get a sense of his soul. The problem was he was wearing contacts that day, I think. Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. Harry Reid, run away. Now, this is the problem with policy that doesn't understand the total implications of the policy. Excuse me, I'm going to need this to run my car. Now, when you have a limited resource that's being used as food, what's going to happen if you use it for energy? Now you got millions of people that are starving because of this alternative, which is not nearly as efficient as oil. The Great Wall between product safety inspection and factories in China. Hillary Clinton, I pledge no more personal attacks on my drug-addicted, possibly Muslim opponent. The heroes from the California fires. Katie Couric, the anchor. This is Ahmadinejad standing on the coffin of an American soldier addressing the United Nations on American ground. Hugo Chavez striking hammers and sickles. This is when another celebrity went down to Peru with she had a Mao bag, not knowing that the Shining Path, which is a Mao-based communist group, Marxist group, had contributed to 70,000 deaths in Peru. And all these things, words and images, have meanings. You know, they glorified Che Guevara. He was responsible for 400 executions in La Habana prison, 12 prisoners that he executed himself. He was a murderer. Mao t-shirts, you know, communist regime in China responsible for 60 million deaths. The USSR responsible for 40 million deaths. Kim Jong-il, 2 million starved. Pol Pot, 2 million. These people are evil. They should not be on merchandise next. For the last time, if you don't tell us where you planted the nuclear device, we'll have no choice but to appoint a lawyer for you. The ATM and the AMT, the automatic teller machine and the alternative minimum tax. We'll stop here. This is my favorite cartoon out of the bunch. I love it because this is actually Sheryl Crow's quote. Meet Sheryl Crow. She uses only 1 square of toilet paper per bathroom visit to fight global warming. And she's reaching her hand out, and the guy's just looking at her hand like, I know I've kept you guys longer than you wanted to be here. So let me just wrap up real quick by saying this election is so important. This republic, this democratic republic that we call America, it needs to get back on track. And I feel privileged to be blessed with a job that allows me to inform people of what I think is going on, but it's really the citizens' responsibility to act. If you believe in the constitutional framework of America, if you believed in its inherent goodness and the exceptional nature of our country, look, I'm not ashamed to say to the President of the United States, you are wrong. America is not a nation of entitlement. America is an exceptional nation. It's a nation of achievement. And I'm proud to be American because we are the best country in the world. If you believe in those tenets, then I encourage you to get involved because we need real change in 2012. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Michael, so much. Let's give him a big, big round of applause. Such an honor to have Michael here. Thank you, my friend. Yeah, it's such an honor to have Michael. When he said he would come out and speak to you all, it was so great. Such an honor.